And so the other way I'm going to show you how to solve our quadratic equations is with something that is called the quadratic formula. Okay, you definitely are required to be able to solve using both ways. Yesterday we talked about putting all those pieces together, solve by factoring. Today and tomorrow we're going to look into solving by our quadratic formula here. Okay, so here at the top, that's our standard equation for our quadratic, right? Remember our quadratic, we can see where our x squared. Really, I talked about this in our last video. Really understand, that the a value is a coefficient with x squared, the b value is a coefficient with x, and the c value is always with the constant. Okay, and notice how standard form we also have it set equal to 0. Okay, same thing with factoring. We, in order to start solving by factoring, it had to be set equal to a 0 there. Okay, so now this giant thing here, this guy here is what is known as our quadratic formula. Okay, so again, quadratic formula, we are trying to solve for a value, right? We're trying to solve for a value of x. So the formula actually is, x equals. Okay, so you can see how I color coordinated a little bit. These A's, B's, and C's are directly related to where you find them in the standard equation. Okay, now, again, pay attention to the colors. If you like the colors, you can use the same ones, but understand, you just need to understand where the relationship comes from. Okay, so the formula, negative b, or we could say the opposite of b, right, or blue value there, plus and minus. Yes, those are both plus and minus signs in the same formula. We'll get to, when we start simplifying here this in a little bit, you'll understand why you see a plus and a minus sign there, right? These are two different solutions that we can see. Okay, the square root of b squared minus 4 times the value of a times the value of c. Okay, all of that, okay, make sure we understand that all of that is underneath that radical, right? It's underneath that square root sign. And the entire thing is being divided by 2 times a. Okay, so as we get going here, we can see on the right, I have kind of steps to go through. I think it helps you. If you can write out the steps, to definitely refer back to your notes, or, you have this on video. So definitely you can kind of keep going back on this video and replaying the steps that you need. Okay. So step 1, it says substitute the values into the formula, right? So we've got a formula here. We've got our first example. We've got x squared minus 7x minus 30. Okay. So the first thing I think we should do is we need to identify, what our a, b, and c values are. Okay, so a value is the term next to the x squared. Okay, so the term next to the x squared here, you don't see it because, well, when we have a coefficient of a 1, it makes no sense to write it, so we don't write it. But understand that the coefficient of our x squared here is a 1. Okay, and just until you get the hang of it, I would definitely write down these values every single time we are asked to solve by quadratic formula. Okay, so the b term is the value next to the x. Well, the value next to the x, it looks like b is negative 7. Really, again, like we talked about with factoring, pay attention to your signs, right? The sign to the left stays. Okay, so that is a negative 7 there. And the c value, well, the c value again is just constant hanging out, usually at the end, and it looks like it is a negative 30. So once we can recognize what our a, b, and c values are, we are just going to literally throw these into the equation. Okay, so x equals negative b. Well, my b value is a negative 7. So this is kind of weird here. Okay, you're going to see a double sign. But if we use parentheses like we always should be doing anyway when we substitute, that shouldn't be an issue, okay? But don't see this negative as that negative as well, okay? So we have a negative b, and if b is negative, we have a negative number there, okay? Or that's why in the beginning I said the opposite. So if b is a negative, well, we can see that this negative and negative is going to turn into a positive, okay? But anyway, we're just going to keep plugging along here. So we've got plus or minus the square root b squared. Well, again, b is negative 7. Now, really pay attention to the parentheses. If we don't use parentheses there, we're going to be in trouble, okay? When we square a value, you really need to make sure you are using your parentheses, okay? Minus 4 times the value of A. Well, we found A to have a value of 1. Times C. Well, C is a value of negative 30. And just so we can see it better, I'm going to extend that square root. Okay, and this entire thing is being divided by 2 times the value of A. And again, we found A to be 1. So, pause just for a second. I know this kind of looks maybe big and intimidating a little bit here. This is definitely the big idea of the quadratic formula. You need to see what I have written here, what we wrote down together there, and truly understand where these numbers are coming from. Don't just agree with the fact of what I wrote down. You really need to ask yourself if you truly understand where and why I wrote the numbers down there where I did. Okay, so now that we got the numbers situated into our formula, step 2 over here on the right, I wrote simplify the stuff underneath the radical. Okay, so we've got this big formula here, and it kind of can be a little bit intimidating seeing everything for what it's worth, but I'm going to break it down piece by piece by piece so it doesn't look as gigantic anymore, okay? So the first thing we're going to do once we've got all of our numbers into the formula is all of that stuff underneath the radical, I'm going to simplify, okay? So we didn't do anything with this. X equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of. If you have a calculator, you're really going to want a calculator for this work. If not, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it will be a little bit more difficult, okay? So all of that stuff underneath the radical, okay? I'm not going to put in the radical just yet, just the stuff underneath. And literally word for word what I see, okay, I'm going to put in my calculator. Okay, all of the parentheses, all of the negatives, all of the minus signs, all the squares, okay? You can see what I have underneath the radical is literally the same exact thing that I have in my calculator. Again, Calculate 84 is a great app on your iPhone, or I think it is on the Android market as well. Okay, it is a calculator, literally the same thing that you are seeing here. Okay, so when I hit enter, it tells me 169. All right, so now that my value or the stuff underneath the radical says 169, I'm going to put that 169 underneath the square roots, and then we have the 2 times 1 underneath. All right, so that was step 2. That was my purple step. Let's use a different color. Let's use, I'm going to start running out of colors here. Let's use this light blue. All right, well, the next step tells us to just kind of take care of that negative b in the 2a, okay? So if you got these double signs here, clean that up, make that look a little nicer. You know, instead of seeing the multiplication of the 2 times 1, you know, go ahead and take that for what it is worth, okay? So x is equal to, right, this was our step 3 over here. Negative 7, we have double negatives there. This is going to be a positive 7, plus or minus the square root of 169. Over the other part of this, go ahead and take care of that 2 times 1, and we know that to be a 2. All right, so the next step, I'm going to do it in the same color. That wasn't a huge step. Go ahead and take the square root. Okay, so we've got in our equation here, our formula here, we have the square root of 169. Well, let's see if this turns out to be a perfect number. Again, in your calculator, so notice how I'm not going to do anything but the square root of 69. The square root button, your x squared term, down the left-hand side, notice you see that square root in blue. So we go blue button, x squared, so we can see our square root pop up. I'm going to see 169, and we're going to hit enter. Okay, so the square root of 169 is 13. This is a nice number, right? This is a perfect square. Okay, I'm going to talk about perfect squares here in a second. Okay, so these are your perfect squares, right? The square root of 69 is an actual non-repeating decimal, just kind of a super quick example here. You know, the square root of 12, you know, you can't write that number down. This decimal is going to go on forever. This is called an irrational number. Okay, you're going to see your delta assignment. We're doing stuff with rational numbers. Rational numbers are numbers that we can physically write down, like this 13. Okay, so again, now we have x is equal to 7 plus or minus, not the square root of 13, right? We found that the square root of 169 to be 13, right? This doesn't say square root of 13. It actually is the whole number 13, all being divided by 2. Okay, that turns into be a big misconception that we want to leave that radical there, okay? Well, we know what the square root of 169 is, right? Our calculator told us that it was the complete whole number of 13, okay? Just be careful there. The radical goes away, okay? And now kind of getting down to our last steps here. Hopefully we can see this green. Separate our two cases. Oh, yeah, it shows up pretty well. Okay, we're going to separate our two cases. Now you're going to see why we have a plus and a minus sign here. Okay, so this is a big formula. So instead of having to write the formula twice for a positive case and a negative case, we go ahead and write the signs together to kind of save time and space there. Okay, so I'm going to do the positive case in this green, and I'm going to do the negative case in this pink. Okay, so the positive case, right, x is equal to 7 plus 13 over 2. In the negative case, x equals 7 minus 13 over 2. Okay, so again, instead of, breaking these things apart in the very beginning and having to do all this operations, twice, we go ahead and just wait till the very end to separate those positive and negative cases, okay? So now, our last and final step, once we have our fraction, go ahead and simplify our fraction out there, okay? So the first value, I have 7 plus 13, which is 20. 20 over 2, x is 10. The same kind of situation is going on over here with the pink guy. We have 7 minus 13. Well, 7 minus 13 is a negative 6. Negative 6 over 2 is negative 3. Okay, so if I can squeeze this in here. Okay, there are your two solutions. So if you like it, love it, hate it, same thing kind of with the factoring. You are definitely going to be expected to be able to do both. Okay, when you get to, Algebra 2, there's a reason for behind doing all this. And it's actually something we should be getting to, but with these times, we can't get to it right now. So you've got to have both skills. You've got to be able to solve by factoring, all that stuff that we did yesterday, and we need to solve by quadratic formula, okay? So this was just one example, and it did take a little bit to get through, but, it's our first example. I wanted to be a little bit methodical with it. I'm going to show you 2 more examples. Again, it's a video, so if you get lost or confused, you can pause it, you can rewind it, you can go back through it, okay? Just understand, again, we have our formula. Hopefully you were able to write that down. And as we kind of got going here, we have our steps over here to the right. Again, if you understand what's going on, go ahead and go into the assignment. If not, I've got 2 more examples coming there.